Welcome,
Fab.
everyone. I'm Helen from Teesside University. I have kind of a dual role there. I'm one of their principal lecturers of learning and teaching in the School of Health and Life Sciences, but I also teach forensic science, so I've got a kind of a slightly dual role, sort of 50-50 both. Okay, so obviously with my PL learning and teaching hat on, one of the things that I kind of think that lacks a lot in universities is learning and teaching directed research, and there's numerous issues for this and numerous barriers. But it's one of those things that gets forgotten, and fundamentally it's vitally important because it is what we're doing every day is learning and teaching. So I've kind of listed some reasons why I think we need learning and teaching research. From addressing the issues we encounter in our teaching. I mean, how much has teaching changed over the last 3 years? It's been completely undermined by COVID and then completely reinvented and kind of come around full circle at some universities, not all of them, some universities, like my university's gone completely back on campus. As like a lot of universities, we're now having the problem of getting our students back on campus. Mainly also because we record the lectures so they can listen to them outside the lecture. But I'm hearing across institution there's a mass problem with students getting the students back on campus and into lecture halls when they've obviously got recorded lectures that they can listen to instead. Learning and teaching directed research underpins our professional practices within our teaching, so it improves us as professionals, expands our knowledge, and I think with the meme making, those that have been involved, it's been also quite good fun. One of the things that I think is so fundamental with regard to learning and teaching research is the fact that it helps contribute to this high quality student experience. Universities are so focused on the student experience, and yet a lot of the research, in my personal view, tends to be more subject specific research. So we're looking at, like the ref more than anything else. Whereas to reflect the student experience, you need this, obviously, your academics doing this subject specific quality research, but you also need the research in the student experience and actual what we're doing in the classroom, so that learning and teaching practice on the ground. I also think it allows for us to reflect on our practices, which everyone is so busy. It's something we rarely get to do these days. I'm sure we've all been in the situation where we've got a lecture coming up. All we get to do is basically update our presentation from last year, go into the classroom, deliver it, because there's not time to reflect on what we did last year, consider what needs enhancing or what new techniques have appeared in the last sort of year or so to bring that sort of presentation a little bit more up to date or what have you. Technically, we update, but we don't necessarily always update around our learning and teaching practices. And I think that need for reflection and thinking about how we actually teach is really, really important. And that allows us to kind of move education forward. So I'm going to ask you to put either shout out or put in the chat, what do you think your barriers are for being proactive in learning and teaching research? Or if you are proactive, how do you manage to manage it amongst everything else? I'm going to stop sharing my presentation so I can see the chat. So fingers crossed.
Absolutely.
Okay, I'll just share the thoughts that I kind of came up with when I was thinking about this. So I think it's pretty much what we've said, like the lack of priority within institutions. Although I do think within a lot of institutions, promotional pathways around learning and teaching are becoming more prominent, which is nice to see. Not necessarily they've quite got the pathways quite right yet. Some of them are quite difficult, but they're definitely getting there. Conflicting priorities. I think as academics we've got to do this, we've got to do that, we've got to do this, bit of that, bit of that. There's so many priorities, and ultimately I guess the students and the teaching, the actual physical teaching is what comes first, and then depending on what your contract is, it might be a supplementary role, it might be subject specific research, it might be course leadership, it might be module leadership, etc., etc. that by the time you get around to the learning and teaching research, so much other stuff is packed in there that you just don't have the time or the motivation even to do it. I think one of the things that I mean, I've worked in a university now for about 17 years. And it's only in the last few years that I feel that I've had the confidence to start thinking about research properly. And I think with a lot of people, and I've been in this learning and teaching role for probably about 6 years. So it's only maybe within the last couple of years that I felt that I've had the confidence to actually think about my own learning and teaching practices in terms of turning them into research. And I think that lack of confidence is quite prohibiting potentially to a lot of people. Um, it definitely was to me until I kind of thought, well, I've been around the block enough now, let's just go for it. um, I think one of the things that I always found, and this was very prominent with my own institution until a few years ago, that learning and teaching was very niche, very cliquey. Well, it felt very cliquey with my own institution. There's like, the little learning and teaching group that usually sat within the social sciences, because I guess it's complementary maybe to learning and teaching in some ways. And it felt like if you weren't part of that group, then you didn't do learning and teaching research, full stop. And I think when you look in the journals on a wider perspective, a lot of the articles and a lot of the, sort of learning and teaching general kind of societies and things, the same names pop up. And again, it feels like not like it's a secret club, but a very difficult club to get into because it's very prominent with some amazing researchers. But to find your little place in that seems very difficult. And I don't know if anybody else feels like that, but that's something that kind of really prohibited, really sort of held me back, I think, for quite a while. Again, with any research, the lack of funding is an issue, possibly more with learning and teaching. Has anyone tried to find learning and teaching research funding? It just doesn't really exist out there particularly. And you have to get quite creative, I think, in how you look at funding in terms of turning it into learning and teaching. And I think one of the things that we've kind of touched on a little bit is sort of that lack of learning and teaching community. I mean, the Remote Forensics Network is brilliant. As Rachel said, there used to be the Forest Conference, where again that was a very dedicated sort of forensic learning and teaching conference in the UK. The American conference has its learning and teaching bit, but it's quite disjointed. I think remote forensics is possibly the first real global community, although today we just got UK and America, so we're not completely global as yet, or they're not completely global as yet. Okay. But when I was thinking about this, there are some positives about learning and teaching research that we don't necessarily see in more traditional subject specific research, our forensic research. We have the resources at our fingertips. Our students are in our classrooms every day. So we're not experiment on them because obviously, but we can use them for our research as long as you've got ethical clearance. Hasten to say, we have our classrooms, at our disposal. It's such a fantastic resource that we encounter every week when we're teaching. And I know a lot of people say, yeah, but if I try something and it goes wrong, then that'll show up on my module evaluation, it'll show up on the NSS. In my experience, if you try something once, it goes wrong, and you move on to something else next week, students don't tend to remember that little tiny bit of the module where it went slightly wrong. And I think sometimes students even like to see the fact that we're a little bit more human and the fact that things don't go right for us. So, when things aren't going right for the students, sometimes it's quite nice for them to reflect, thinking, oh, well, remember when Helen did that in class, it didn't go right for her either. So I guess it's that failure, that acceptance of failure that our students and ourselves probably find hard to do. I found with learning and teaching that even a small idea can end in a very long journey. And the meme making project is an excellent example of that. It was just like a quirk to fill in a lesson, and it has turned into this really quite exciting research journey, which multiple people are now involved in, and it's just really nice. Within learning and teaching, there's plenty of scope for research. So if you think about all the subsections of learning and teaching, there's assessment, student experience, our learning environments, digital, etc., etc. So you can pick like something that speaks to you as an educator, which is really nice. So I do quite a lot. My they call it the golden thread, don't they? But my golden thread is kind of more around inclusivity. So I do some learning and teaching research around Minecraft education as a educational kind of resource. I've done some work on sketchnoting to try to kind of improve inclusivity in the classroom. Meme making came from the idea of making the classroom a little bit more inclusive. So I've kind of got that as my golden thread, I guess, that comes through my research. But the research projects themselves are really diverse and not really related in any way. I guess like any research, it can benefit you personally. So it can help you on your career pathway, especially if you want to go down that learning and teaching route. It can help you with your professional reputation. And the thing for me, I think it can actually enhance your kind of life at work a little bit. I think for those of you that arrived in this session like a little bit after the time, at the very beginning, Rachel was getting very excited about how much fun she had meme making in class. Alicia was talking about the first time she's laughed in class for a while was through meme making. There was a kind of enjoyment in the project, which can only be beneficial, especially when we have such high workloads and such full-on jobs. The other thing which I kind of like about L&T funding, which again doesn't really bode well for pathway progression and things, but you can do research without funding. And that's really unusual to have research that you can do without funding, mainly because the resources are our students. So in fact, they're paying us for us to, in effect, they're actually paying for us to research them, I guess, with their fees. But you don't need to have funding to do the research, which is quite refreshing. To not have to fill out a research funding application and then wait months, get the funding. You can literally make these projects happen overnight if you're got the right idea, the right people involved. It's a very strange one in that respect. Okay, so just to move on to how this kind of little idea that was shared in, I think it was January, January's remote forensic session has kind of turned into this project, which we have, I think there's 8 of us now involved in it. One of them is an education person, not a forensic person, but the research came from, in semester 1, I was thinking of ways to try to engage my second years into, I guess, enjoying the lesson a little bit more. At Teesside University, in the science department, we have a slight disadvantage of our lectures are 3-hour blocks. And if you've ever tried lecturing for 3 hours, it is absolute hell. I know most master's students have 3-hour lessons and stuff, but these are undergraduates. So, 19, 20-year-olds. Keeping them entertained for 3 hours can be quite a task, especially if it's this evidence type that they're not particularly excited about. I tend to teach things like glass, which I get excited about, but generally when you compare it to one of my colleagues that might be teaching about bones, or for example, Rachel teaches firearms, glass doesn't seem that exciting to the majority of students, I'll be honest. So what I did was ask the students to make memes to reflect on something they've learned in the lesson. And it was the original idea of this is from my sketchnoting research, where the students would sketchnote something they've learned in the lesson. So this was just kind of an update in a way of that idea, but something a little bit more disposable and quick to do. And the second years really liked it, and it just seemed to lift the classroom. So, 2.5 hours in, everyone was getting a bit yawny, a bit sleepy. There's a really nice comment later on, actually, which I'm going to share some student feedback. It wasn't from my university, but it does mention that it's helped the students stay awake in lectures making memes. And literally, when we started making these memes, it really lifted up the classroom. Like you felt the classroom sort of physically lift in its energy. And it was a really nice kind of way of the students reflected, and the memes they were making to me showed some true insight into an understanding of the subject that they were learning about. So I came to the remote forensics meeting in January and shared this idea and asked if anybody else would like to jump on board and have a go at doing a bit of research in it. And everyone in the meeting was like, yeah, let's go. So we did, put in for ethics, didn't need no funding, which was great. Everyone was keen to try it out in their classrooms. We had no expectations of where this was going to go. But at the end of the day, if you try it once in your classroom, it doesn't work, you can move on. And again, students probably won't notice. But we did have, from that conversation, an idea of what output we wanted from this. And interestingly, I'd subsequent to the January meeting, I'd put in the from the work in semester one as a presentation at the Advanced HE conference in July, which is a general learning and teaching conference here in the UK. And it had been accepted. So now everyone that was involved in this research, we already had an established output with a presentation on meme making at the Advanced HE conference in July, with only one of us attending because it's so expensive. But it also allows for potential further outputs such as publication, and I think we all agree it's been quite useful for this kind of networking as well. So what we did as a group is introduce meme making as a means to allow the students to reflect in the classroom. And then we surveyed the students to reflect on their experience. Everybody who's involved in this project has brought something to it. It's been really, really amazing. So from my half-formed idea, Felicity, I think it was, found a really neat way to make the memes, which was much better than my clunky way of doing it. Everyone has brought something into it. It's been really great to work as a kind of a collective around this. I don't think we don't really have a leader or anything. We just kind of all seem to work. When someone does this in their lesson, it quite often gets circulated, so we can all see the memes that have been made by the students, which has brought many a smile to my face. But yeah, so we surveyed the students. So I put through ethics at my university, but everybody's universities was included in the ethics. And I know some institutions have then had to put my ethics through their ethics to have that kind of agreement with their own institution's ethical policy. But we've all gone through the ethics as a group. And what we're doing is basically, as a collective, trying to assess whether this has allowed the students to reflect and retain their knowledge better in this kind of imaginative and creative manner. And just to share with you some of the things. So I tend to focus very much on the interpretation of forensic evidence in my teaching, as you can tell from these memes, because very, very, very based around interpretation of forensic evidence, apart from the footprint one. And the students have really seemed to have picked up on my enthusiasm for interpretation. And I think all these really show to me that the students have really understood what my key message were, be it around some common fibres are evidentially, or common fibre colours are less evidentially significant than more unusual colours. The fact that glass, when it retains on clothing, is affected by the surface type, and then that then impacts on the interpretation. Black cotton fibres, yeah, not the favourite from an interpretation perspective. The footprint one is quite an interesting one. This was the first meme making that I did with the first year students, and part of the lecture is a 2-hour lecture on footwear marks, and part of the lecture, the very start of the lecture, is talking about, it's their first forensic evidence type that they get introduced to, and it's really, really talking about the fact that you need to get your terminology in forensic science completely and utterly right. And I use footwear marks as an example. but it's really talking in a wider context about terminology. We talk a lot about whether a footprint is a footwear mark, and that fact that footprint is the wrong terminology, and if you do it in a core assessment, then we would pick you up on the fact that it's the wrong terminology. I had so many memes about footprints and footwear marks from that particular session. It was really great to see that message had really struck home with the students, and they were reflecting back on it, and hopefully will be much more mindful of their forensic language in the future. So we're part through surveying the students at the moment. So we've got 78 students from, I think it's 4 institutions at present that have contributed to the survey. You can see that the students have enjoyed the meme making activity apart from 8 of them. And I think that is really something that to me is quite fundamental. We want to make our learning and teaching sessions enjoyable. We want the students to be actively enjoying what they're doing. And then hopefully that fun element, one, it helps them remember things. And secondly, it translates into better retention, better NSS, all the things that, essentially the university is really mindful of. And again, the majority of the students think that they remembered the lesson content better being forced to reflect on it and make the meme. And I think when we were introducing this to the students, one of the things to introduce it to the students is remind them that it is a tool for reflection. It's not just we're going to make a meme. You have to introduce it correctly to the students. And I think that's a key thing in kind of any of these activities. So I just thought I'd share some of the students' comments. The one I mentioned earlier, great, didn't fall asleep once in these lectures, really made me smile. It made me wonder what the student usually does in lectures. I've just got to imagine a vision of them bringing in their pillow to kind of curl up and go to sleep. But overwhelmingly, the comments, not all students provided comments, but most of the comments really stressed the idea that they enjoyed the activity. They liked the fact that they could then think of a bit of information they've learned and do something, create something with it. People found that it helped make the lecture content more engaging. One student, and Felicity, I think this is one of your students, so it'd be interesting to see how the exam goes this year. One student felt it reduced the time they needed to study for the final exam because they felt they could recall much easier. And it'd be interesting to see if that bears out or not. But yeah, we shall see. So all in all, it's pretty positive. Although there were some students that didn't like the activity, as there is with everything. Some students, not very many, but one student in the comments did say that they felt it was a little bit juvenile in its concept. But they'd only ever made one meme. So they'd done it once. By the look, we asked them how many memes they'd made. They'd done the activity once, and it sounds as if they thought, this isn't for me, rather than embracing the activity, which is a shame. But as I said, it's not for everyone. Okay, so that's kind of an overview of our sort of meme project, and it has been a beautiful collaboration between, well, all female researchers actually, interestingly, and kind of how we want to, so it's kind of really nice collaboration between all of us out of a little tiny idea that seems to have captured everyone's imagination, and everyone has been really proactive in taking part in it. But I also think one of the advantages of this type of research is that you only have to do a little bit. It's not a big onerous research project. We're gathering the data through a Microsoft Forms form. So it's just distributing that within the students, and it's just making sure that this is embedded in your learning and teaching, which you're going to have to design anyway for a session. So it's not necessarily huge amounts of work extra. Obviously, I guess the work as the group, the group has to work a little bit more when this semester's finished and we've got our results, and then deciding what to do with that and deciding how to move this forward. That's where the work's going to really start. But this part of the project has been really enjoyable and not a huge impact on workload. at all. I mean, others might disagree, but I don't think it has been. So I guess in generic terms, it's kind of, if you were to develop your own learning and teaching research, what kind of areas would you like to develop? And I guess it's a good opportunity to kind of see who in this group would like to develop in similar areas, and maybe then we can get more collaborations and networking underway, really.